Hello, and welcome to theCUBE, pod episode 118. I'm John Furrier and Dave Vellante. Dave,
John,
salute.
yeah, a half-assed salute to you, man. I feel like I can't complain. I saw when Jensen came on. I think he came in on the red eye from like Asia Pacific or something. He was
Yeah.
he was more burnt out than I am, but so I can't really complain. But I'm sort
What
of
a whirlwind this week. Obviously, we're just down, tired dogs right now, grinding hard. AWS reInvent was amazing. Got exclusive videos with Matt Garman, Swami, Colleen Aubrey, all the top execs, great stories, Agent Core, all the news. And then last night, exclusive with Jensen Huang at the GSA Awards ceremony. They won the most respected public semiconductor company, over 5 billion. Obviously, it was a landslide. Broadcom also won an award for most respected company by the analysts, financial analysts. Charlie Kawaz was there. He came on. We interviewed all the winners backstage. Part of our new partnership with the GSA, Global Semiconductor Alliance. In October, we did the top female technical leaders here in Palo Alto. So, clearly the semiconductor industry is going through a reset. Jensen Huang said that. He said that on stage. He said it on theCUBE. Great intimate time, very candid, really more of a celebratory conversation, but he did talk about the future of distributed computing. And I think it's the first time I've heard him really talk like that. Hence, I prompted the question. AI factories are factories of intelligence, as he says. Jensen Huang, again, coming on theCUBE was the big news last night. And again, before this week, we had reInvent. Again, Matt Garman, again, exclusive one-on-one fireside chat. That was epic. And then all throughout the day, startups, the core news, Nova Forge, Frontier agents, new infrastructure, Trainium 3, general availability, UltraSys servers, more GB300s at AWS, partnership with Nvidia. So this was an AI infrastructure week, agent week, and obviously capped off with great celebration. I thought, day 3 of reInvent, breaking analysis was great, but we had pumped out, I think we're the #1 media company per ChatGPT on coverage of AWS. Rob Hof and Mark Albertson were on point. I think they delivered over 25 stories.
I saw those guys in the media room, and they were like, "Hey, Dave," boom, heads down. I mean, there were just two guys just cranking, and then the team back at SiliconANGLE putting out some great coverage. I thought they did a really, really good job, and not just of AWS. They covered a lot of the ecosystem announcements. I mean, it's a ridiculous show to try to cover, and I think they did a really good job. And by the way, I love how Jensen talked about manufacturing intelligence, because when we wrote the AI factories report, I looked at his definition of AI factories, and he talked about manufacturing tokens. And I was like, I just feel like that's too narrow. And I wrote that in the report. And I was like, I'm going to go out on a limb here and contradict Jensen, which is never a smart thing to do.
No,
and I said, it's really more manufacturing intelligence. And now I've heard him now a couple of times starting to use that term. So,
of course he read your stuff. He reads our stuff all the time. That's been word inside NVIDIA. Also, by the way, he used our line from the CUBE pod that GTC is the Super Bowl of tech. He actually used that on stage. That's fun. He actually brought up AI edge factories with my conversation as well. So, I think Jensen is a student of the rhetoric and understanding how to best explain what's going on, because remember, it's very technical. I just watched some of his Joe Rogan podcast interviews, and he even his Joe Rogan level conversation, he has to kind of break down essentially deep learning definitions to Joe Rogan, and it's very difficult. So I think one of his master skills is, as an orator, is to take computer science principles and break them down like AI factories. It was very smart. When I first heard that term, I'm like, I love it. And remember when Dell said, should we use AI factories? I said, absolutely, no brainer. That was clever.
I haven't seen the Rogan interview, but I'm sure I got to watch it. I'm sure Rogan was like, AI factories, what's that? Wow.
Well, Jensen was great in that interview. And one of the things he did say is like, look at, the tasks being automated away. Yes, jobs will be lost. He goes, but in radiology, one of the most prolific use cases for AI, there's actually more physicians being hired because the job isn't to read the mechanism. The job is to diagnose disease. So if that's going to be, if that task is taken care of, there's more throughput, there's more demand, hence more throughput in terms of capacity. More people are coming in and out, they're doing their jobs. So they're seeing a lift in jobs in radiology because of AI. Now, that's because that's their job, that's their purpose, not the task. So, he breaks out this whole job thing by saying, look, if the job is a task, it's most likely will be automated away by AI. If your purpose is to cure people or diagnose, or if you're a lawyer, help service people with the law, then those tasks with AI will augment that. He's totally right on this. And that's where a lot of people get fear of like, oh my God, AI is going to take over everything. Yeah, they're going to take over all the shit jobs. Okay, all the
Well,
crappy, mundane tasks. Yeah, so those task workers, they're going to be displaced, but the opportunity is they could actually reskill because they can get a purpose.
if you think about the healthcare as a system, and you think about, how hard it is to get schedule an MRI or get an appointment for a cardiologist, unless you know somebody, and in our circles, you happen to know doctors who know doctors, and you can cut the line. But the average Joe, he's got to wait months sometimes to get an appointment. And why is that? It's because all the administrative, tasks that are going on and the backlog that's going on. There are bottlenecks in the system. You remember, you're a student of that book. What's the name of that book? It shows the bottlenecks in the system. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And, it's epic manufacturing study. But he's right that it's going to attack that, and it's going to create new opportunities, new jobs. I mean, I believe that, and there'll be some pain in the short term, but you can't protect the past from the future. It's just there's no point in that.
The
Or you end up like Europe with okay, lifetime employment and lack of competitiveness. Let me tell you something. There's a lot of jobs going on in China.
well, they might be more ahead of us. So on Amazon reInvent, I want to get your take. In talking to Rob Hof, he got some feedback. Not everyone was blown away by Matt Garman. He didn't knock everyone's socks off, but he did do a great case of presenting some good content. I thought his keynote was very rushed. He had to kind of jam everything down, but he had great fireside chat with me. He had a great fireside with Bruno Bona and partners. I thought they knocked it out of the park with Forge and Frontier agents and a variety of supporting announcements. Swami's focus on reshaping the software development process, again, was great. And finally, wasn't well known, but it kind of came out at the end, but Werner Vogel's last keynote was yesterday. So he's stepping down. So,
Saw him walking around at the where the gondola is, and
yeah,
in the Venetian. I saw him strolling around last night, and
doing a victory lap, 14 years with,
yeah, he was just chilling. I'm like, wow, this guy, talk about a legend. Pretty amazing.
yeah.
But I would agree with most people. I mean, I thought Matt's keynote was technically very rich. I thought it was kind of muted with, it wasn't long on strategy, which not surprising. His AMA with analysts was outstanding. He was funny. Every answer to every question he was having people crack up. Um, I think, look, here's my take on Amazon and reInvent 2025. Amazon's in the position where they have to service millions of, I sorry to use the term, legacy customers, right? They're like, you use the term new legacy, but they've got millions and millions of customers, running cloud services, on Nitro and virtualized EC2 instances and S3 buckets, and they're adding all kinds of new services. But now they got to balance that out with investments in AI, and they're going all in on AI, and they showed that. I think you're right with, well, certainly, Agent Core and the extensions there. They talked about strands. I think Nova Forge, to me, was the most interesting, or one of the most interesting announcements, because as we've been writing in the Cube research, enterprises want open weight models.
Yeah.
They want to be able to customize those models. This is the first that I know of that is using that is making the training data available. I don't think there's certainly no U.S. company doing that. There may be some third-party Chinese models doing that, but this is Amazon doing it, and so that was a big move. I think Like Hero, super impressive. Something they don't talk about at all is Neptune, which is their graph database. And I think they just haven't sort of figured out how they're going to position that strategically yet as a linchpin of sort of data harmonization. But that's the piece that's still missing to me, John, is okay, how are you going to harmonize all this data? How are you going to inject process data into the equation? And then build that 4D map of the enterprise. But all the surrounding scaffolding, you heard a breaking analysis yesterday, that's what Amazon's doing. And there's no question that they're all in on AI. And I think they did a good job balancing it. I don't know if you saw David Linthicum's post on day one, basically saying they can't do both. I disagree. I think they are doing both. They're serving millions of customers and they're bringing AI to the table. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Well, Amazon's looking good. I want to get your thoughts on some other news in the industry right now. Netflix is going to buy Warner Brothers. I don't know if you saw that
Yeah,
news. 82.7 billion in cash and stock deal. Um,
I'm kind of stoked.
it's
But people, I was talking to somebody today. They're like, "No, it's bad. It's just going to be another conglomerate." I'm like, "Well, it's going to be a conglomerate anyway. I'd rather be Netflix because Netflix is their shit together."
Yeah, I
You
like
know?
Netflix. So Netflix knows streaming, right? So we'll see how that shakes out in the landscape, and certainly will have ripple effects in other classical legacy Hollywood and the studio models that we've been, talking about all the time being disrupted. So, yeah, and also other news: New York Times suing Perplexity, claiming the AI startup violated its copyrights and kept using its content despite repeated demands over the past 18 months.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's how do you feel about that? I mean, Trump has basically said, "Hey, we can't be, kind of adjudicating on a case by case basis, and so let them let them scrape." But I don't know. As a content producer, I mean, we're not hardcore about our copyrights, but if somebody's stealing our stuff, we get hardcore. I can't blame them.
yeah, I
And
mean,
how much does the New York Times spend on on journalists? It must got to be a couple hundred million, right?
I mean, it's a tough call because at one level, it's like they paid for the original content, and Perplexity is technically a search engine, but it's also presenting content. So, I think they have to cut a deal, in my opinion. So that's if they've been told not to and they keep scraping, come scrape our site. We're open. Perplexity, keep taking though they do take our content. We don't mind. It's all free. Unlike the New York Times, they have a serious business model, Dave. So they have some huge subscription business. And for them, this is a direct threat. So it reminds me of the, back in the day when the internet came out, classifieds were the big money maker and everyone would defend, we got to protect our classified ads. It's going to be a dead horse anyway. So, the question for the Times is, are they on the wrong side of history fighting for those subscription revenues? Or can they get in front of the Perplexity signal and say, hey, this is inevitable. This is a doomsday scenario unless we get out front, or just shut the thing down and go completely walled garden and, defend and protect. That's clearly what they're doing. So they're deciding why would they give up that money? But I think I'd be nervous if I was someone at the New York Times on what this means.
Yeah, I mean, look at they've got through the dead tree zone, right? And they created the business model that seems to be hanging in there. They buy the Boston Globe and some other dead trees, okay, and they go finally get their digital act together, and then boom, this comes along, right? So they had to weather the search storm. That was tough, and the whole shift to online, and so they figure that out, and now this happens. I mean, I don't know. What do you do if the New York Times they're going to build their own chatbot? Okay, fine. That's not going to, be a game changer for them. I mean, what's their proprietary advantage? They got, great journalists. A lot of people don't like them because they say they have Trump derangement syndrome. Maybe partially true, but I like the New York Times. I know you read it too. You saw Sorkin's Deal Desk. That was like phenomenal content that he produced this past week. And there's a role for that. And how do you fund it? How do you pay for that?
Oh, the Times has great reporting, but the piece they did on David Sachs was way off. I mean, I read that 2 Sundays ago. 5-month hit piece. Of course, Sachs was prepared with rebuttals, law submissions from his lawyers. He kind of made them look like fools, but they kind of went after him. They didn't have nothing to go after. So, you know, I just don't see why they would go after him like that. He's not really hiding the ball. He's been very transparent. David Sachs has done some amazing things in the government. Genius Act, Clarity Act, and, you know, Dario Gil, an IBMer, he just had the Genesis project approved. So you got guys like David Sachs, Dario Gil, people we know from our tribe, tech tribe, in government, working probably for pennies on the dollars, if anything, probably for free. I don't know how much they get paid. I know it's not banked like in the private sector, really affecting change. Now, if you don't like it, great. You know, have an opinion, but, you know, creating false narratives and kind of conflating two things and multiple things together to give the impression of the shadow on them, I just didn't like it. I thought it was bad. I mean,
Well,
and knowing both sides of that, the Times definitely catered to the, you know, he's a Trump guy, therefore all credibility's gone. And that was clear from the reporting. And people could debate me all you want. I know my friends here in California were like, oh, yeah, you're all wet. Oh, no, I read it pretty objectively and made critical thinking decisions on both sides, and that definitely was not a true article. The New York Times got it wrong, and they made it sound right. That's the thing. They make it sound right. On that story,
yeah, the high
it
brow,
sounds
right?
good. Oh, yeah, the New York Times, they're really credible.
Got they got Russia wrong, you know, the whole Russia thing, the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, they've definitely made some mistakes.
Yeah, but to your
But
point, they do good reporting, but when they have this over-the-top slander, okay, and slanting stories, there's gotta be real punishment. You know, those reporters they should be held accountable, and someone should fact review it and say this was botched, and they rushed it out anyway, knowing there'd be impact. So and that's the problem with these credible organizations, that once you start doing that, the reputation issues happen. So again, most people will default to, oh, it's the New York Times, it's got to be right. David Sachs, he's a capitalistic guy. Oh yeah, he's big tech. Oh yeah, I'll lean with the Times. So they play that all the time. It's
well,
really, I mean, it
they have
bothers.
a different standard than, I don't know, some web rag. I mean,
No, they're different standards. That's why it sounds perfect. It checks the boxes, but it's just you got to
you're
do
saying,
deeper. You got to do
oh,
deeper inspection on these articles when you make claims like he's making money lining his pockets. They even made a claim that, you know, he was engineering stuff for All In to make more money. David Sachs is already rich. He doesn't need to have more money in All In. All In makes some money. Not like, you know, I know Jason and those teams are monetizing, but it's not like they're gonna, you know, retire on All In. They're just making good fun money for them compared to what they have. So it's like they make it sound like All In is tied in with this. It's just like it's so manufactured. It's ridiculous.
well, All In has influence,
Of course,
right?
you know, and take them out, right?
So,
Competitor, you know.
right, exactly. Well, but to your point about somebody should be held accountable, I mean, my question is that should should there be different standards for the New York Times versus where do you draw that line? Um,
Well, the line is they have standards. I like the New York Times. Like I said, I read, and Wall Street Journal has good standards. You know, so I was talking to
People
Jordan.
don't like the Wall Street Journal these days. I was in a text chat the other day, and the guy was saying somebody I really respect, like Wall Street Journal, waste of my time. I was like, I mean, I read it, but I read the Times. I watch Fox News.
You
I
know,
try.
the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, mainstream media is having the same um, evolution as the LLMs. Let me explain. So what I learned this week,
That's the
or
back of this one. Hit me.
it's
Yeah,
like,
no, I'm dying to hear this.
okay, so what, you know, at Amazon, we had this conversation all week at reInvent. The debate was, does one model rule them all? OpenAI, Claude, Gemini. So remember the power law, Dave, right? You got the, you know, the XY axis in the power law. At the top of the power law is the most popular models, Gemini, but they're generalized models. They're jack of all trades. They're more broad mainstream, therefore they know a lot, but they're not the most domain intelligence, domain specific. So you look at the AI LLMs, you see the power law coming down where you have specialized models that are taking some of the big frontier LLMs and making them smarter in that domain intelligence. So I look at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal as very credible, mainstream, generalist models. They do a great job. The reporters are well-versed generalists. They're not specialists. They couldn't sit down with Jensen like I did last night and riff on AI factories at the edge, which I did. They'd be like,
But they do
are you
tech,
going to
they
get
do
more chips from
politics,
China?
they do sports, they do all kinds of
Yeah.
good,
I mean, I use
very,
ChatGPT all the time. I don't say it's bad, but it's not everything. So you start to see, again, my point is the big models are great because they're mainstream, they cover a lot of ground, they do reasoning, but are they the best at specific things? And that's where I think AWS has kind of laid the groundwork, which is saying, if you got better data, for instance, a company that's not yet trained into the big models. My point is, journalism is the same way. You're starting to see specialism journalism come in to mainstream because the internet's connected. So I think that's why I like Wall Street Journal and New York Times, because they complement the SiliconANGLE Cube reporting because they do a lot of the mainstream stuff, so we don't have to. We can vector into it and kind of comment on it, but they're not going to be in the weeds on Nvidia. I mean, your breaking analysis you did with George Gilbert at reInvent, that's way off out of their pay grade. They would
well.
never do that.
So this is a big debate, and George and I touched on it yesterday. That's going on inside the Cube research. One side driven by George, it's kind of coming at it from the software stack. The other side, driven by analyst emeritus David Floyer, coming at it from the architecture of the new approach. And what Floyer is saying is, so essentially what you're saying and what Amazon's betting is that Nova Forge, for example, companies can take that, they can customize that for their own purposes and inject their own data, their proprietary data, and do their own sort of internal training and have that just for themselves.
Yeah,
And as
and get frontier model capabilities with their data injected into it.
yeah,
Because the frontier models, the general ones, don't have their data because it's proprietary.
right. So okay, so for frontier model, they are using that term. Whether or not it's true frontier model, it's probably debatable, but obviously very powerful. But the point is, when you talk to people inside of Amazon, not Amazon Web Services even, but Amazon like retail, like warehousing, supply chain, when you talk to people inside of like big banks like JPMC or big tech companies even, that are doing pretty advanced stuff with Gen AI and agentic, they have to go through some really heavy lifting to get their data model right. It's almost like SAP in the 90s all over again. Harmonizing the data, building the knowledge graphs, and it just takes a lot of iteration and a lot of work. So the Floyer's point is that that's too complicated for most enterprises that can't hire a couple thousand engineers to do this stuff. And he believes that Anthropic and OpenAI, the frontier model vendors, are actually going to become the next great software vendors and provide tooling and scaffolding to be able to help organizations ingest their data, harmonize their data, and build process models and relational graphs to completely reimagine their enterprises, build digital twins of their enterprises, et cetera. George believes that's bullshit, that it's going to be ISVs that do that, that those LLM vendors, those frontier model vendors don't have the enterprise software chops to do that. And this is a big debate inside of the organization right now.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
I was going to say, I'm like, you guys are both right. It's going to meet
The
in the
question is, what is the chicken and the egg, the cart before the horse situation? I mean, to me, I would err on the side of lining with Floyer that if you don't have the architecture first, you can't get the software. So if you look at like the stack, if you look at like the silicon level, it's silicon up. So if it's silicon up architecture, you have a better architectural view like Floyer, but George isn't wrong because that's where the value creation happens. The value extraction happens in the enterprise. So I think I would agree with George, like look at the ISVs, they're the ones who are going to do value creation extraction. Maybe the back end of the extraction, of the creation, and the front end of the extraction. The infrastructure, architecture, it would be value creation enablement, not much capture, but definitely enablement. So accelerated enablement. So yeah, I mean, I think they're both right. They're not wrong. It's good debate. We should get them on theCUBE immediately.
Well, we are. So Floyer just dropped this taxonomy. He calls it AI Neo System. He's using that word like Neo Cloud, play on Neo Cloud. It's called AI Neo System Taxonomy, a framework for next generation AI infrastructure and enterprise integration. And he lays out, I mean, he'll love some of this stuff because he gets into the Neo system components and the definitions, Neo Edge. He uses Neo Edge, and he's totally aligned with your thinking on basically, hyperconverged at the edge. I know he's talked to you about some of this stuff and some of the bandwidth constraints at the edge and how that's going to play out. Jensen touched on it yesterday in your short interview with him. And Floyer just dropped like a tome on this that we're going to flesh out and debate and just get community input on. Well, it's like super cloud when we did that on steroids.
So I just sent you a text. Alec, my son, is playing around with a new website called Silicon Analysis.
Okay.
not to be confused with semi-analysis, Dave, but it's an automated template we're playing around with. Based upon public data, what is the CUBE data, what is the ranking of the top people in the industry, in semiconductors?
Okay, I got it.
Cool. It's a prototype, but I bring it up because I've been having a lot of conversations lately around some of the work SemiAnalysis has been doing, and looking at what we're doing and some of the things I think that they got wrong with IBM and some of the other reports. But there's automation.
SemiAnalysis got wrong?
They had a little haymaker at IBM. They went off the rails. I think they probably didn't.
Did you see the thing they did on TPU?
No. Which one?
They just dropped it yesterday or the day before.
Oh, I did. I saw their Amazon one. I like their work. I mean,
no, it works outstanding. Yeah. But sometimes it's misleading. Like, so I don't know if you're a subscriber. I subscribe, and so the whole TPU thing, I personally think it's overblown. And so they went deep. Those guys are deep. They go deep into the benchmarks and showing how Ironwood, TPU 7 has the TCO advantage and better utilization, and they get into the networking. I mean, they went, it's like 20,000 words. I mean, it's deep. And then they said at the end, for subscribers, we're going to talk about what it means for NVIDIA. So they basically shit on NVIDIA throughout the whole piece, right? Basically showing how TPU 7 is so much better from a TCO standpoint. They do have a slight little mention. Oh yeah, by the way, it's a year behind, GB 200. They did mention that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then for subscribers, you got to subscribe, you log in, you see, oh yeah, well, you got Vera Rubin coming next, is going to blow away Ironwood 7.
Oh, so they're doing clickbait.
30,000 words just basically go out the window.
Clickbait. No, it's called clickbait. Get the subscribers in.
But to their credit,
it's smart.
They go deep. I mean, they have these diagrams, and it's your eyes gloss over. I mean, I took a nap after.
The first pass at this little leaderboard has NVIDIA at composite 77.7, Alphabet, Google 70, Amazon, Microsoft, Broadcom, AMD much lower, but on the AI hardware side, they're number 2. But sentiment, 100% sentiment goes to NVIDIA, Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. 100%.
I mean, I would have Avago up higher in that. I would have, but this is our data. I love this. Alec did this, so I'd have NVIDIA and then Broadcom, and then I would have Google, Google and Broadcom right there. How do you do Google without Broadcom? Broadcom is Google. So, and of course I'd have TSM up there too. I mean,
you got a lot of interesting, well, it's all public data combined with some of our other data. If you look at some of the rankings coming together. So this is, we're aggregating all the data from the CUBE AI, public information. Again, we're experimenting with this, but I wanted to get a better handle on some of the semi-analysis research, some of the silicon analysis, mainly because the benchmarks out there are, you remember the old benchmark days, you can make anything look like you want. I think the benchmarks are certainly good to see benchmarks, but what I want to see is what the data says, because the implications of the semiconductor is going to have in open source. So for example, model adoption is directly correlated to what's being used, not who's better, but like what's being actually used. So I'll see TSMC, they're a foundry, so they're a little bit different category. They're an outlier, but they're clearly huge. Intel, saw Pat Gelsinger last night, Dave, he put a shout out for you. I mean, they're crawling along. I mean, they are in scramble mode right now, going out and figuring out what their future will be. And I'm not down on Intel. I think one of the things that they can do is use their leverage of their assets to create new business model opportunities and go to their partners and saying, how could we, Intel, help you? And I think that's what I see them doing in the market right now. All the people that I'm talking to, they're hearing Intel's walking in, leaning into, we want to drive more revenue for Intel. How can we help you so that we could do that? They're really revenue focused versus kind of like, hey, we're Intel, buy from us. So the culture of Intel has significantly changed with Lip-Bu-Tan in there. 100% changed.
People are making money off of Intel. I mean, the U.S. taxpayers making money off of Intel. Masasan's making money off of Intel, right? I mean, it's been pretty remarkable. The big question, of course, is can they sustain can they regain their leadership position in foundry? I mean, I don't think it's a matter of. Did you hear Besant on Deal Desk?
No.
When Sorkin asked him about Taiwan, and he was kind of stumbling. I mean, Besant is usually really solid. He kind of stumbled on this one. He was like, "No, nothing's changed. We're allies." And then he kind of had a faux pas. He goes, "We're allies with China." China or Taiwan? He goes, "Oh, both. Nothing's changed." And so, Sorkin pushing him is,
that's means everything.
What if Taiwan gets invaded by China? What is the U.S. going to do? He goes, "I don't deal with hypotheticals." And so that's an easy way out. But it seems to me that right now, if I had to bet, I would bet that there's no question in my mind that Xi is going to try to take over Taiwan, and I think he's going to try to do it without firing a bullet. And he's probably going to be successful before the end of the decade, probably well before the end of the decade. And I don't see the U.S. stepping in. I think they're probably feeling like, look, you guys take the East, we'll take the West, and let's go compete on the open market.
Where's TSMC in that West-East thing?
Well, exactly. And so this is the big thing is, so then what happens? So what happens is now China controls the most important semiconductor manufacturer in the world and has yet another lever that's bigger than rare earths. And what do we got? We got a US-based factory of TSMC, which will now be owned by China. And we got Intel, which is like, struggling to get 18A volume up and getting 14A. We'll see if it even works. And so that's what we've got. We've got the N-1 or N-2 even. So I think the answer, my previous answer, as you well know, was to do a deal with TSMC. And I think that deal fell apart because I think TSMC said, you know what? So China takes us over. We're in bed with China. It's a pretty good place to be. I think they probably figured, hey, there's worse places that we could go. And so if you're not going to get the TSM IP, what do? Do you try to do something with Samsung? Do you try to do something with IBM? I talked to insiders at IBM. Remember Lisa Su? She was at IBM for years. She was a rock star at IBM. She's obviously a rock star now. IBM has process technology that they could bring to the table. I've been talking to some insiders. You know how Jassy says there's no compression algorithm for experience. Some people at IBM said, you know what? We helped Samsung actually cut the line a decade ago. And so, let's not forget, IBM's got world-class research. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's got to be more than, Lip-Bu-Tan getting put in charge and the U.S. putting some money in and Nvidia putting money in. There's got to be more. There's got to be some concerted, and maybe there is that we don't know about, behind the scenes sort of IP research and development effort where there's some knowledge transfer going to Intel. And IBM would be, to me, the logical place where that could come from.
The
But
Mark Benioff says it would, to Business Insider, Mark Benioff said it would not shock him if Salesforce changed its name to Agentforce. The company started using Agentforce for many, now this is a little bit late in the game.
we told him, we told him to do that when George and I interviewed him
Yeah.
9 months ago. We're like, you got to change the name to Agentforce.
Well,
right?
we also told him to change the ticker name from CRM.
Got to do that. I mean, Larry is on top of it. Like Oracle AI world. Hello, Oracle open world when everybody says you're not open. Oracle cloud world when everybody says you're not cloud. Oracle AI world. He's ahead of the game. And so Mark's got to do that. He's got to get. He just doesn't want to give it up because it's his baby from 1999.
No, I think he's fine with it. I mean, even Elon mentioned it, but their symbol,
What did Elon say?
their stock ticker on the NYSE is CRM.
No, right.
Okay.
So
it's like
you got to change that.
agent.
Right. AGT. I mean, it's got to change. I mean, everybody's calling it for the death of SaaS. So
I had no idea that Salesforce was an NYSE company. Good for them.
Oh yeah.
No,
yeah.
We should get them on then. Come on, let's get them on there.
So, no, we got to reach out to.
I'm
Mark.
gonna drop a note to those guys today. Salesforce, by the way, had an amazing news at AWS. They have Agentforce 360 on AWS, means with one click, if you're a Salesforce customer, you can literally have integration with your instance on Salesforce. So let's take us as an example. We use Salesforce, right? So Salesforce for our sales, data, CRM. You got to log into the portal. You got that thing. You got to change your password every like 5 days. It's so convoluted. You got to write it down. Now they got the authenticator. It's you're logging in the reports. It's like click, click, click. It's fucking my head. It's like
I love it, but I hate it.
It's the worst.
You go into do products. You go into like Salesforce Classic, and you're like, oh my god, I've been like.
So someone build an executive report for me. I don't need to go through click, click, click. Well, this is an AI dream scenario for Salesforce because we've been reporting. They've been getting major advancements by abstracting away all these systems to make it more elegant. But now if you're on Amazon, which we are on Amazon Cloud, as you know, we could literally in the marketplace buy Agentforce 360, click on it, boom. We can then run all our dev in our cloud and run integrations immediately without even touching the instance. We can create we can bring Cairo into it. We can move data into Amazon. The whole game changes. This means that this gives Salesforce and others who do this, he was talking to IBM about this. Nick Otto, you and I had dinner with him at reInvent. He runs strategic partnerships for IBM. Same thing over there. This idea of getting the developers, everyone says, win the developers, trying to win the developers. Well, they're already on Amazon. So the marketplace is more than procurement now. It's an integration hub. So I think with this agentic auto coding and Kiro and these new autonomous coding is going to open up massive ecosystem integrations. I mean, just think about that. Using Salesforce our developers, to actually make our Salesforce interfaces better without even going into Salesforce to do it is totally incredible. So that means Salesforce will have access to the entire cloud ecosystem developers. IBM's been trying to win the developer, but they've been pushing their IBM stuff. Use Bluemix, use this. And so now they can just go on Amazon. They go meet them where they are, as they say. It's a cliche, but it's true.
Well, I think you're right about Kiro. I think Kiro is kind of undersold. You heard us talking about this. It's Kiro's in Amazon's autonomous agent, and it's like, the way to collaborate between teams of humans and teams of agents. It's way more than vibe coding. It's really a next step in AI engineering. You had GitHub Copilot, which was like, okay, I'm writing some code, you complete it for me. Okay, great. And then of course vibe coding, which was Cursor and Windsurf, and you've done vibe coding, and it's kind of a cool thing. But this is, you're able to share and iterate. So it basically, it goes way, way beyond. It's like you start with like a requirements doc, and it helps you write the requirements doc. So it can essentially take the spec, reverse engineer the spec. It can complete things that you're missing in that reference document, and then write the code. I mean, this is like next level. Um, and maybe this is where, and they say it's going to frontier development agent. So maybe this is frontier level.
Yeah.
Um, I think this is something that I thought Garmin understated it in his keynote. But we'll see. Um, I think, I don't know, we're bouncing around here. I wanted to touch on the TPU thing. I mean, have you been following that?
No.
Nvidia getting, and maybe this is old news because I was sick for 2 days, but I was listening to the talking heads on CNBC, absolutely not understanding. What's her name? Deidre was like, "Oh, Nvidia's in big trouble because Google." And like 3 weeks ago,
Well, they
anything you
haven't
did
even
with,
shipped a TPU yet.
oh yeah, no, they're shipping TPU. I mean,
Not the ones that are replacing NVIDIA's. The whole,
trust me, not really replacing Nvidia's. They're complementing Nvidia's. Even Sundar said, "No, we're going to keep working with Nvidia. They have to because everybody's supply constrained, and that's what's happening right now. People don't understand the amount of volume lead that Nvidia has. I mean, it's like, I don't know, 2026, they're still going to have 90% of the market in terms of volume. And volume, as we've said a million times in semiconductors, is so important because of learning curve, and it drives your cost down because of Wright's law. And that's NVIDIA's advantage, in addition to the fact that they've got CUDA, and they've got the libraries, and they've got the tooling, they've got the ecosystem. It's just easier to use NVIDIA. And so now, you remember the people, young people, even not so young people won't remember this. Do you remember the Amdahl coffee cup? Okay, so back in the day, IBM was the dominant player. I mean, they were more powerful than Microsoft is today. They were more powerful than Nvidia, I would argue. They were everything in the computer industry. You remember this. And mainframes were everything. Mainframes were the big kahuna. So there was no such thing as a CIO back then. You were like the director of IT or the VP of IT or something like that. And Amdahl was the main competitor to IBM. They made PCM, plug compatible manufacturer. They did plug compatible systems. And so they were, later, they came out 2 years later, sometimes 3 years later, but they were technically better, and they would beat IBM's next generation, and they would have a window where they could make some margin, and then IBM would crush them with the next generation, and they'd start the cycle all over again. Well, anyway, what would happen is the vice president of technology would buy an Amdahl coffee or get an Amdahl coffee cup from the Amdahl rep and put it on his desk. I said his. It was mostly guys back then, but maybe there was some hers. But most of the people I met were hims. And they had the Amdahl coffee cup on the desk. And so with the IBM rep walked in, they'd see the Amdahl coffee cup and they'd say, "Oh shit, we better give them a discount." And that's what people are claiming now is happening with TPUs, that within Anthropic and um, and Meta and some of the other players like Ilya's company, they're using the Amdahl coffee cup metaphor, i.e., TPUs from Google, to get better discounts from Nvidia. Okay, maybe. I don't buy it. Everybody's supply constrained. Google's going to get the TPU allocations to itself first. So you got to question what kind of supplier they're going to be. And if you screw with NVIDIA, you're, you're going to lose your allocation. So I'd be careful about how I play that card.
the, um, the game for who's going to win in AI is going to be clearly going to play out, and we're going to watch it. I think tactics will change, but the fact of matters is that the consumers have voted with their clicks. OpenAI platform grew about 19 million monthly visits in 2022 to this past September, 5.9 billion. Okay, so just in the 3 years, you can talk about, you know, large language models, jack of all trades, they're still crushing it, right? So,
Oh.
I do love
Look,
this.
I should be arguing with Sarjeet that, hey, we were right. They're not going to maintain their first mover advantage, but I think you were right. I think OpenAI is, who was calling them? Somebody was calling them Cisco the other day. I think Michael Burry was calling them Cisco. I'm like,
Dude, Michael
not
Burry's been all he's been doing is making wrong calls lately.
really.
He's Big Short that's his one trick pony. Like, come on, dude.
Yeah, I
Like,
shouldn't put that on him. I think it was Michael Burry. Somebody was calling him Cisco. Somebody else was
well,
calling him
Michael
Nets.
Burry is the one who said Nvidia was Enron.
Yes, right. And
Yeah.
Nvidia countered that,
Now,
and
he's
he's
not wrong about this incestuous relationships with Nvidia, but it ain't Enron. Enron was fraud. Right? Like, Nvidia
but
is not fraud. I
somebody
mean,
else called them. Somebody else called them Netscape the other day. I'm like, Netscape didn't
no,
have
no,
it.
Netscape never.
Netscape had no hardware, and this is not it's not a good analogy with the browser. Crawford
Well,
Bell Pratt,
Netscape lost
Crawford
right out
Bell
of the
Pratt
gate
made
to their first competitor, Explorer. Now they had monopolistic power, but they were already back in the game. They just out-engineered a better browser out of the gates. It's like Claude.
right.
That's like Claude should be nipping at the heels.
Crawford Del Pret had the best analogy. Dave Itticheria and I were riffing at MongoDB 2 years ago about this topic. Is it are they Google or are they Cisco? And Crawford chimed in. We're talking about Nvidia, and Crawford chimed in and said neither. They're Wintel, and he was right on. He said they got the Intel, the hardware piece, they got the Microsoft software piece, all in one. And they're like, yep, he's
But
right.
at the
That's
beginning, of this year, they had traffic that was just taking on in terms of the top properties, Wikipedia. Okay, fast forward into March, they surpassed WhatsApp and Reddit and YouTube. X, Twitter. Okay, and then in the summer, they cross over Amazon traffic. Amazon. Okay, and then they settled in just under Instagram. So the only four properties bigger than OpenAI, ChatGPT is Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Google going to the top. So Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, ChatGPT, Amazon. Put that into perspective. That's huge, huge position. So again, if they were Netscape, they would have fumbled under the Claude threat. Because Claude was the first one out.
totally.
Google came
That's
out
a good
fast.
point. Right. Right. They would have fumbled when Claude attacked them. Totally.
Remember, Netscape also, nope, young people don't know this because they don't have the experience we have, but in the 90s, Andreessen did the browser, brought it to Netscape, and he was kind of dismissed because he wasn't a CEO. So that's why Andreessen Horowitz is so hardcore about keeping founders around, because Andreessen kind of got thrown under the bus. They put him aside. Oh, yes, the adults will take it from here. I think Netscape actually didn't execute well at all once the browser was out there. They started doing enterprise. They didn't really double down on the browser. Okay, so the history, and you heard it from me first. If you want to come out of the woodwork that worked at Netscape, I'm happy to debate this, but I have facts. I was there. Netscape dropped the ball. They didn't innovate, right? So they got crushed by Microsoft, who was like a machine.
Barksdale even said, "We don't care about the browser. We're going to be enterprise software company."
Yeah, and they
Like,
hired a CTO, and Andreessen got.
good call. Next thing you knew, they were dead.
Yeah, next thing you know, they're dead. That's classic VC playbook. Let's get an adult in charge. Andreessen's just a kid. If Andreessen and Horowitz and the young guns that were there that did Explorer, they would have been kicking ass, because I know most of the people there are my age now. So, like, they're cool. But they were just pushed aside because what's this internet thing? That's not OpenAI. OpenAI is like, man, we're full guns ahead. Now, the one thing that could have killed OpenAI, which didn't, Sam Altman and the team engineered this through the coup. If you go back to remember the coup attempt, okay?
Yeah.
That was a very interesting time at OpenAI. That could have been the key hallmark of their history, because they survived that. That could have been a pivot in the wrong direction. That could have been a complete crater. Instead, they persevered. They persevered forward and said, screw it, we're going, as you say, Dave, damn the torpedoes, right? Like, that's what they did. Once they got through that, it's been, I think, just been great for OpenAI. Now, they're not out of the woods yet, but look at the numbers. Unbelievable.
Is Sam Altman in the class of Steve Jobs Elon Musk, I mean, is he at that level? He's certainly got, I mean, he's taking risks, man. I mean, he is out there. And
I
so,
mean, look, besides the competition, Gemini, Claude, and Perplexity, ChatGPT still has 80% of global AI visits, according to SimilarWeb. So that's new information that's out. It's just, I'll send you the report. It's pretty interesting. I like Google's, I mean, I like what Google's doing too. I mean, again, I like everybody. I mean, I think Amazon could be a dark horse. I think this Nova Forge could be something similar to open table formats. Remember how Databricks kind of created that, just shut down that debate, said which is going to open source this and make the tables open format. This Nova Forge thing could force the LLMs to open up and provide a similar service. That's a strategic, like, if that hits, Dave, if it truly works, I can bring my data into a frontier model that's half baked with checkpoints I can turn knobs on and make our data a frontier model at the cost of some CPU cycles. That's low end. That's compelling. If it works, we'll see.
well, this near term, this is what enterprises need. The question is, will mainstream enterprises be able to take advantage of it, and how do they do that? What kind of ROI is going to throw off? By the way, speaking of Databricks, did you see they're doing a raise? Rob called it a Series X.
Series X. No, I think what's after K? I think K was their last round. Let me see what their last
So,
round was.
so think about
I
that.
can't even count the alphabet that high. What's after K? L.
At a valuation that is, um, let's see, 1.7 times Snowflake. Snowflake's at 75 to 80 billion, and these guys are going to be at 130 something. What's that, like 1.6, 1.7x Snowflake? That's outrageous. So
Series X.
Rob asked, why doesn't he want to go public? Well, why should he? you know, get hammered. Snowflake did a good quarter and they got killed. They got crushed. I was surprised. CrowdStrike the other day had a great quarter, record quarter. They got crushed.
Well, Dave,
MongoDB.
we had a long week, long fall. Now it's time to bunker in for the holidays.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll say, well, not quite yet. We got a media week next week. We got I'll be in New York for a couple days.
Yeah.
Right.
Not a lot of heavy events though.
No, well, don't you have the Bitco IPO?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's just on the Florida Stock Exchange. That's just the day of the office.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not
There you go.
reInvent. reInvent was 60,000 people.
I know it was packed.
Mobile World Congress, SC25, reInvent. Those events are massive. CES, Davos. We should go to Davos. I got a couple of invites.
I was telling you, my
Yeah, let's do it.
plane mate last night is going to be there. She's going to scope it out. I met a guy at Snowflake Summit who was all over Davos. Snowflake's, I always end up in their PR program and their AR program. I bounce. But one of the guys in their PR program, they bring in all these influencers, and one of the dudes was all over Davos, and he was following up with me. I don't know if you remember. You were super busy. I was like, "Hey, do you want to do Davos this year?" You're like, "Yeah, maybe." I said, I know a guy. Anyway, and this was last summer where you had to sort of get your shit together. And
I'm kind of like, when I hear, let's go to Davos, like, yeah, take some time off. It's the beginning of the year, It's like, it's CES, you get Davos, NRF hits. Next thing you know, it's
well,
March.
it's same week as NRF, right?
I think, yeah, I like NRF. I mean, I like NRF. I like the retail right now. I think AI in retail is huge. I think it's not yet understood, but I mean, my theory, hyperconverged edge is coming with all spectrum, licensed and wireless, unlicensed spectrum collapsing in with the AI factory node. I think Nvidia won't admit this, but I got it out of them. From my standpoint, I figured it out. They're going to do a converged edge with the box, a factory. And every company will be a factory everywhere. Jensen essentially said that yesterday you look at my interview, I'll send you you saw it, I haven't published it yet, but you watch that last question, Dave.
I did.
Yeah, AI factories at the edge. Coming.
He didn't rubber stamp your scenario, but I would say this. He
He
basically
didn't say no.
no, but my interpretation is and he didn't say this, but my interpretation and inference is you have to connect seamlessly to the AI factory. And the AI and the cloud is completely changing.
Yeah.
Right? It's becoming this giant distributed system, as you said.
Jensen has his talking points, but he doesn't read the script, but in his mind, you can see him pulling out sections of his narrative. But he always talks about the computer. You know, the computer's changed. It's not a machine anymore. It's an intelligence. Okay, so he talks about the computer, and he's a huge student of computer industry history. He's been participating in it, as we have been. Of course, he's Nvidia founder, so he's well down the road and doing big things. But we're all in the same tribe, right? So when you talk about the computer industry and the role of a computer, and the way he's talking about factories, which we love, you can't ignore the fact that distributed computing is part of the substrate of the computer industry. So if the computer is changing to a factory of intelligence, then you're going to have a distributed factory of intelligence model. Because remember, distributed computing is almost like a math proof. It's how the world works. But you can have distributed computing with an overlay intelligent factory model that's generative, that's run by agents. So there's only one conclusion to Jensen's narrative, is that AI factories will be connected and distributed and have highly intelligent interconnects. That's it, and software will run on it. Now, if you believe that to be true, then you say, what does that look like? Retail, hospitals, and look at the examples they're doing. So to me, it's very clear. They haven't publicly announced it because I don't think they have the reference architectures in place yet on the networking side. But I think the wireless will be the key. This year at MWC will be a very interesting year for us to keep our ear to the ground on this, Dave, because networking is the key to success in distributed computing already in factories. InfiniBand, Nokia's 6G. I mean, that's basically short range, high bandwidth. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Sounds like InfiniBand to me.
For a while. And Jensen laid it out at GTC DC, like, hey, America, we lost in the telco. Thank you, Lena Khan, not Lena Khan, but Lena Khan's predecessors. I go a quick Lena Khan rant. I mean, she would always talk about, well, if it weren't for the DOJ and the FCC, we would have never broken up AT&T. Well, what did that get us? It got us a bunch of bigger, dumber conglomerates that really didn't do anything there. We lost our telecommunications edge, and we lost Bell Labs to Nokia. So Jensen's trying to claw that back.
Well, I mean, look at Nokia, Bell Labs, Alcatel-Lucent. That is essentially a U.S.-based like firm, even though that you and I argue about Nokia being, domiciling from their heritage. Yeah. But the core assets that Nvidia is working with is here in the United States. That's good for national security. That's good for the national agenda. Now, what's the choices? What did Nvidia have for choices? Huawei? No, they're China. They're out. Then it's Ericsson. Everyone knows is hard to work with. So like, all right, Ericsson or Nokia? Pick your, okay, we're all in on Nokia. So Nokia is going to be the US version of Huawei, in my opinion. That's a scenario that's could play out. So that's good for NVIDIA because NVIDIA can say, let's do extreme co-design together.
And Huawei's looking good globally. I mean, you're going to see them in a big way at MWC, right? I mean, of course, you didn't see any China at supercomputing, none, zero. And you'll see a lot at MWC.
I got a picture in the studio here from many moons ago. The Huawei senior execs standing right here in front of the desk. I got a video. Like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, no, in the whole Cold War study, they're nowhere to be seen in Silicon Valley. So
you remember when Huawei, they were like poking around. They came to us and said, hey, we want to buy your service. Yeah. And I remember my friends at IDC at the time, they were like, yeah, we're flying. Huawei's flying us over. We're doing a big conference over there. I'm like, interesting. And things were, kind of good back then with China. But then what we found was the inquiries that we got from Huawei were basically get us inside information. Right? They didn't ask it like that, but they were like, what's this company working on that's not public? We're like, well, we can't share that. Well, but we bought your service. We're like, well, we'll go find out and send us documents. We're like, oh boy.
Oh boy. Yeah, we'll pay you double the rate.
So,
that's espionage.
Exactly.
I
We were
wonder who
like,
falls for that too. That's scary. I mean, it's totally scary. I mean, that's the key.
well, but they were smart about it, right? They weren't that obvious, but I mean, to somebody who's been around for a little bit, it was pretty obvious. And I remember looking at it going, well, we can't touch this. And so we would give them these answers like these Peter Burris kind of, philosophical answers. And they were like, no, this is not what we're looking for.
We want
Like,
specifics.
keep doing that, Peter. That's perfect.
Yeah,
So,
the clock will time out. Dave, have a great
exactly.
weekend.
Thanks.
And we missed last week's pod. We've both been traveling with SC25. I think we missed. I think we might have missed 2 weekends in a row. I had to go to Seattle for reInvent preview,
Yeah,
and then Thanksgiving was we missed 2 in a row.
I know.
All right, well, see you next time, and we'll see what happens. See you on the other side.
Yeah, see you guys. Bye, everybody.